wanted to come out and show you the ecosystem from which I harvested the deer that we're turning into a delicious meal today. And just wanted to kind of let you know what gathering this food is all about. I came out here because I wanted to talk to you about deer hunting and sort of put the meal we're cooking up in context. But I actually got really lucky and I found a beautiful antler shed that a buck must have dropped this winter. So this is the shed I found. You can see it. Nice, beautiful shed. It's stained red because the deer will rub on a type of alder called red alder, and that will stain the antler this beautiful color. This antler is from a large buck. This would be considered a majestic animal by anybody's standards. Not that we're big trophy hunters or anything, but even just when you're out in the woods camping, it's nice to see a beautiful, mature, healthy deer. I'm totally stoked about this find. We're going to take a little break from the woods and I'm going to show you how I make a gochujang flavored venison stew, and we're going to serve it over a creamy polenta. So I hope you enjoy. Gochujang is a sauce originally from Korea, made out of, my understanding is made out of fermented brown rice and red pepper paste. And to me, it just adds a really delicious, warm, soft spiciness to pretty much anything you want to use it in. We put it in creamy pastas. Obviously, we'll be using it today, so I really recommend it. So I've got some vegetables I'm going to put in this dish. I've got onions, because that's, I think, the base of a good braised dish. It's onions. I got some carrots. I got some local hardneck garlic, and it's nice spicy garlic, nice big cloves, a little spicier than the soft snack that you get in the grocery store. And I've got some red pepper, because who doesn't like red pepper? Well, probably some people, but we like red pepper here. So I'm gonna get these chopped up to start making dinner. I originally got the recipe for this dish from an article in Alaska magazine, but it's definitely morphed over time to fit what our household likes to eat. So it's definitely changed. My chopping skills leave something to be desired, so I'm kind of slow. So while I chop this up, why don't we watch this other clip? Well, now that I found a nice comfy seat, I want to talk about hunting a little bit, since we're cooking up venison. A lot of people think that hunting's all about getting a trophy and putting a big rack of antlers on the wall. And of course, for some people that's true. There's a lot of people in the world and everybody's usually got a different opinion. I don't think that's true for most people, and it's definitely not true for me. And in Alaska in general, we have a pretty strong tradition of subsistence hunting. So going out into the wilderness, finding, an animal and then bringing it home, butchering it yourself and enjoying it with family and friends. And I think it's an important tradition because it really connects you to the land. Here we have some stew meat, which is basically just meat that didn't fit into a specific state category. Some of the odds and ends and the tougher bits mostly. So we like to cook it for a while to make it nice and soft. So I like to cut them up into about 1/2 inch to inch squares. I vary them a little bit because I kind of like the variety of sizes in there. The meat is cleaned nicely, but we don't trim it up too much. Like, some people don't like venison fat, but we're pretty big fans of it. Especially like venison fat on an animal that you've taken good care of, that you kept cool and clean in the field, is really tasty. And it actually, my understanding is it has a lot of omega-3s in it, similar to fish. So when you're out in the field, you just want to make sure you keep your venison cool, and you want to avoid as much as possible getting the hair from the deer on it, because that hair will have oils that will affect the flavor in a negative way. So you just want to always keep it clean. When you cook meat that you harvest yourself, I think it's a special experience because you can remember the animal that it came from, and you can appreciate that in a way you can't do if you just went to the store and bought a chunk of pork or beef. I'm not saying that's bad. Not everybody can live in a place where you can go out and harvest your own meat. Not everybody wants to, but it's pretty special to eat something that you have a connection to. Now that we have all our ingredients chopped up, the next step is to roll the meat in a little flour, which will help it brown up just to retain moisture. And then when the flour contacts the hot surface of the pan, it'll make a nice fond, and that'll just be like the base of delicious flavor. So we're going to do that next. I hope you guys enjoyed the clips from the woods. It was a beautiful day out there. Anytime you can get out in the woods, it's so nice, especially this time of year when it's spring and all the flowers are just about to start coming up. So I like to put a little paprika in there too. I think that helps the paprika bind to the meat and just makes it more flavorful. I'm using a smoked paprika to add a little extra smokiness. So we'll just put about a half a cup of flour in there, and then I'll put my meat in there and work the flour onto the meat. This is a good way to do it quickly, and any of the flour that doesn't stay stuck to the meat will stick to the bottom of the pan, and then when we add our wine, it'll make a nice thick sort of gravy that'll really enhance the dish. All right, well that's ready. So we'll get our pan going. Well, I hope you guys find this view acceptable. After trying to do this video and show people how I cook in my kitchen, I have a lot higher appreciation for people who do this professionally. It's not easy to get all the right angles and takes. So while this pan heats up, why don't you watch this other clip I prepared for you? Another aspect of hunting that I really appreciate is that, unlike hiking, where you often have a destination in mind, you're busting through the brush, you're walking the trail, you're chatting with your buddies, and you're thinking, oh, I just want to get to that mountain ridge. With hunting, you're not going to a specific destination. You're already there. So you usually just kind of slow down, take your time poking through the woods. You're always paying attention to what's around you. You're listening for small noises. You're looking for tracks, pellets, signs of deer browse where deer have nibbled on different plants. And you're also even like paying attention to the variety of plants in the forest, because deer definitely have specific foods that they like to eat. And because you're being quiet, you just tend to see a lot more wildlife. I've seen brown bears, black bears, wolves, all kinds of birds, pine martens, a lot of animals that you might not see if you were just traipsing through the forest making noise. When you're harvesting deer, we usually get like 3-4 deer. They're not huge. This species of deer isn't real big a year. And because they've grown up in the forest, living on different islands, utilizing different habitats, I guess they all have their favorite food too. They're not being fed commercial pig feed. They're all getting to choose their own diets. They all taste a little different. It's sort of like the terroir of a wine. I guess the the terroir of a deer. Well, this looks nice and hot now, so I'm going to add a little olive oil because everything's better with olive oil. And then I'll brown my meat in there. And we'll lock in all that good flavor. I think a lot of people underestimate how delicious venison can be. The main issue with venison is just making sure that you keep its moisture in, because there's not as much fat as there is in an animal that, you know, spent its whole life in a pen eating grain from a bin. You know, these things were out living in the wild mountains, being chased by wolves, bears, hunters. You know, they've been around the block. These are tough animals. But if you keep that moisture in, they actually stay really tender. So you just, like if you're doing a steak, you want to cook it the minimum amount. Like you want to keep it pretty pink inside. And they're also remarkably clean animals, at least around here in Alaska. And they have very few parasites. You know, there's nothing that you could really get from them. Like, no illnesses, so it doesn't hurt to cook them rare. Yeah, we'll just let this brown up in here. And that looks good. Turn my temperature down a little bit so I don't burn my flour. It already smells really delicious. We actually got this particular animal last fall, pretty high up on a mountain, maybe like 1,500 feet elevation. Me and my wife got it together. And it took us about 3 hours to get it out of the woods after we harvested it. And we were pretty tired. So this meal will bring back memories, and it'll be a good reward for the effort we put in. Remove the meat and put it in a bowl while I saute the onions and the rest of the veggies. Put a little more oil in there. That flour really soaked it up. Just put all this in there all at once. I'm not a picky cook. I'm sure you're probably supposed to do this in stages, but this is a home style meal. Get those spread out on the bottom. Leave the heat on low. It's a nice fond on the bottom. That's going to be good. I'm just going to add a little more olive oil. It's supposed to be good for you, right? And the meat itself isn't super fatty, so like if you put too much oil, it's not going to be all greasy at the end. And now I'm going to add some more paprika. We love paprika. We picked up a love of paprika like about 10 years ago when me and my wife went to Hungary for 6 weeks, and we traveled around, and there was just paprika and everything. And different kinds of paprika. We just loved it. So now we're putting a little cumin too. Mix that up. Then I have my other things I'm adding in here. So I started chopping things up, and then I realized I was out of tomato paste. So I'm going to try and put some a little bit of ketchup in just to add a little bit of a tomatoey flavor. And I think it'll be good because it'll also have that sweetness. I've used ketchup in surprising amounts of dishes like fried rice and stuff where it just really added to it. More than you'd expect. So I'm going to put that in there. Let that ripen, let it develop. Turn my heat back up. So now that I've got that, I'm going to add my gochujang. I've got about 4 tablespoons in here. You can use more or less depending on what your spice tolerance is. I really like spicy food. And I've noticed that different brands of gochujang have different spice levels. This one's sort of medium spicy. Some of the other ones were like surprisingly spicy if you got used to the different variety of lower spice. So now we got that mixed in with our vegetables. And then I'm going to add some red wine and work all that flour up off the bottom to sort of make a base for the braise. And I'll add the meat back in here. I'll let that extra flour get in the pan because it'll just help thicken it up, and I like a nice thick gravy in this dish. Smells like it could use a little cumin to me, so I'm going to put a little more. Stir that up a little bit more. So that's what it looks like at this point. Hopefully you can see that. And then we'll add some stock finally. I'm just using chicken stock, but you could use whatever kind of stock you wanted. I've done it with vegetable stock, and that's been really good. The original recipe that I saw for this used apple cider, and that looked good, but it's not always easy to get apple cider when you live in rural Alaska. So you just kind of make do with what you can at the store. That's kind of the base of Alaska cooking, is making do, because you don't always have those ingredients, you know. So I'm just gonna let this reduce a little bit on the stovetop. And then I'm gonna move it over to the wood stove. So while I let it reduce, why don't you watch another one of these clips? So I was trying to think of what to say, and I just happened to be looking down at my feet there by that stump, and I found this part of an old jawbone. It's probably a few years old. It's a deer bone, but it's real small. It looks like a fawn. Probably a few years ago we had a real snowy winter, and this fawn was just too small to move through the snow, and it ran out of food. I mean, that's kind of the cycle of life in the forest. And so sometimes I'll be out fishing on my boat, and I'll look up, and I can see the mountains on the island I grew up on, and I can look at like a specific mountain top, and I can be like, oh, I remember the time me and my buddy went up there and we camped overnight, and it was real foggy, and a small bear came into our tent, or not our tent, it came into our camp, and it was spooky, like a spooky deal. You know, it's all these memories that you have. It's just really special. Now that this pot's been on the stove for about an hour, hour and a half, we'll give it a stir. And it looks like the meat is getting nice and tender, starting to fall apart, which is what we want. You're really going for nice, soft meat. So it's time to start the polenta now. So we're going to start making our polenta by bringing 4 cups of liquid. I like to use 3 cups of water and 1 cup of milk to make it a little creamier. Bring that to a boil, and then we'll add 1 cup of dry polenta. Now that this liquid is good and hot, now I'm going to add a cup of polenta to it. And you want to add it slowly so that it doesn't clump up. You just want to try and get a little bit in there at a time while stirring vigorously. Now the trick was getting a creamy polenta. Put a little salt in there. Trick to getting a polenta is to keep stirring it. It sort of has the consistency of like molten lava, and it'll bubble up and like explode in your face and cause painful burns. So you want to be sure to avoid that by stirring it frequently. So this is what it looks like. It's kind of creamy, like mashed potatoes at this stage. So now that we've been stirring this for a while, and we've tasted it, so we can tell it's starting to soften up. Now we'll go ahead and add some Parmesan. And that'll be some nice salty sharpness to it. I'm going to add a fair amount, and then retain a little bit there to put on the dinner after it's been plated. I also like to add a glop of butter here. I usually use unsalted butter just because I feel like by the time you add the Parmesan and you added some salt to the liquid before the polenta, that's probably salty enough, plus the gravy and meat. So our polenta is pretty much done. One thing I should have mentioned earlier is that you'll probably want to have some liquid on hand. So if you miscalculated the amount of liquid you'll need, you can pour it in there as needed. And I can almost guarantee you'll miscalculate how much liquid you need unless you're a professional chef, which I am not a professional chef. But here in rural Alaska, there's not a lot of restaurants. So if you want to have a special meal or something that looked good that you saw on the internet or something, you got to learn how to make it yourself, or you better have a friend who's a good cook. So let's go ahead and plate this. If you liked the video or you thought it was useful or interesting, please go ahead and like or subscribe to my channel. I'd appreciate it. Thanks.